So, Minister Vivian,
Yes.
Smart Nation is Singapore's vision to harness digital technologies to continue to be an economically competitive global city and a livable home. What are some of the targets that have been set, and how far are we on this journey?
Well, maybe let me step back and put this in context. First, why cities? First time in human history, I think about in the last 5 years, the majority of human beings on the planet live in cities. Second point is that we are facing climate change. It is a real threat. And how do we sustain human life in a way that's energy efficient, in a way that respects nature, even as we become highly urbanized? The third thing is, because of the digital revolution, the way human beings live, work, play, communicate, organize ourselves, mobilize ourselves is being transformed. So you just add these three factors. The challenge that we face in Singapore, a city-state, suddenly becomes relevant, interesting even, to the majority in the world. So that's why there's this fascination with how do we organize ourselves in the cities, how do we maximize the utility of technology in order, at a human scale, to have a safe, secure, fulfilling, and meaningful life. So the point I want to make is that it's really about human beings. It's not about technology for technology's sake. In terms of targets, I would rather look in terms of goals rather than simply targets. So again, if you reduce it to a human level, it's about jobs. What kind of jobs will our people be doing in the midst of this revolution and in the midst of global challenges? Second, quality of life. Will it be better, more pleasant, more meaningful, more fulfilling? The third, impact on society. Will we really be one people with the intimacy and the familiarity of a village, or will we be anonymous digits in a highly structured concrete jungle? So, jobs, quality, and society. There are several things which we feel, maybe I should rephrase it. First of all, this cannot be a government effort. It has to be a whole of society endeavor. Having said that, we believe that certain things government has a primary responsibility for. Number one, infrastructure. And infrastructure is not just a question of building, but it's also a question of planning and architect. In the case of a city, it means zoning, it means making sure the form and mass and scale and design of buildings makes sense. It means getting traffic right. It means, in the case of digital infrastructure, making sure that mobile connectivity and broadband connectivity is pervasive. And when I say pervasive, I mean 100% coverage. An 80-20 principle is not enough, because that means you're going to exclude 20% of people. For infrastructure, and in the case of Singapore, we have laid fiber to every home, fiber in every office, every factory, because it's our commitment that we will lead the world in terms of access to infrastructure. The same thing for mobile connectivity. We've already have 3, we now will shortly have 4 telcos. We have 4G. We will certainly want to be in the early phase of 5G rollout. So infrastructure, government has a primary responsibility. The next aspect is really skills, because as I mentioned earlier, it's about jobs. And the fact that we know that jobs are being disrupted, this middle class anxiety about future job prospects. The key solution to this is to make sure people have relevant skills. So again, if you look at Singapore, we are embarked on restructuring our economy. We have the Skills Future program to really give everyone, and I really mean everyone, an opportunity to retool, reskill, become relevant, pick up new techniques, make us more productive in our current jobs, but just as important, prepare us for the next job. Because it is likely, in fact, it is highly likely that in the future, all of us will have 2 or 3 jobs in our lifetimes. On the economic front, the Committee for the Future Economy is led by Minister Heng Swee Keat and has got at least 23 what we call ITMs, Industry Transformation Maps, which again is looking at the soft skills side of it. Working with companies, with enterprises, saying, look, how do you think your business is going to be transformed? What should we do to help you? How can we work with you, your workforce, with training institutions, universities? How can we ensure that enterprises and people are ready for the next phase of development? So even in the skill side of it, education, training, I think governments have a primary responsibility. The third area where I believe governments have a primary responsibility is in research, development, and in helping facilitate discoveries and laboratories to get out into the market. Now, this is an area where governments really need to work more closely with research institutions, universities, and with the private sector. So, whilst the Singapore government is stepping up our allocation of investments in research, so for instance, we've set aside $19 billion over the next 5 years. But really what we want is for government investments to catalyze even more research and development on the private sector. So if you look at it, if we have the infrastructure, we have the skills, we have the research, development, enterprise and entrepreneurship ecosystem, then you should see the rise of more startups. You should see hopefully some of them becoming unicorns, it's worth more than $1 billion in market cap. And you should see even our current enterprises being transformed. So these are areas where I think government has a primary responsibility. The fourth area is that governments have to set standards. By standards, and here I'm expressing a personal bias, I believe in open data, open source, open standards. The reason for this is because if you look at the current digital ecosystem, it's characterized by a few big companies, and each company often tries to build a walled garden. That means they try to capture you behind their own ecosystems. And they pay lip service to sharing, they pay lip service to security, they pay lip service to privacy. I think governments have a responsibility to define the rules, the standards, the policies, so that people will have choice. The user content that is generated accrues value to the people rather than to the digital oligarchy. And that it becomes an opportunity for a whole of society collaboration to deal with the challenges of the future, acknowledge problems, and make a collective effort to solve it. So specifically, let's say in the case of Singapore, we believe in open data, so we have a website, data.gov.sg. The Prime Minister has been pushing us to put as much as possible available for the public. It does 2 or 3 critical things. Number one is engenders trust. We're not hiding anything. And Singapore, of all places, this is a government that doesn't have any little secret, dirty little secrets that we need to hide. Transparent, open facts. Next, not just publish it, make it machine readable, but in fact what we're working on now, so make it accessible through APIs, application programming interfaces. The real objective here is to create an ecosystem where the private sector comes in, mashes government data and their own sources of data, and generates new innovative services which meet the real needs of real people, makes it more convenient, enhances the quality of life, creates opportunities. So that's the other area where I think government has a role. Now, beyond that, it's really for the private sector. and the business ecosystem to be inventing new things, new products, new services. And the other challenge for Singapore is because we are so small, by definition, any product that or service that is going to succeed in Singapore has to be competitive internationally, because we don't have a walled garden to protect our companies from competition. So our companies have to be world ready almost at the point of conception. And the other area which we help facilitate this is by networking. So for instance, we've got Block 71, which is a thriving, dynamic hub for startup companies. You should visit it if you haven't, just to get a sense of the buzz, ideas and enthusiasm. But if you also look carefully at Block 71, and we've already expanding second and third phase, we also allow other startup entrepreneurs from Australia, from Southeast Asia, to come in to network with our own entrepreneurs. And again, we hope that that expands. First, it widens your idea horizon, it widens your network, widens access to the market, and also gives you more ideas on technology and technology transfers. So quite a lot has been going on. If you're asking in terms of specific projects that government has rolled out, we have defined about 4 or 5 what we call national platforms that we're working on. One is on e-payments. So you would have heard of the system called FAST, fast and secure transfers, and then Pay Now, which rides on top of the FAST system. What that basically does is that it allows me to transfer money to you instantly and with 0 transaction costs. And I don't need to know your bank account number. I don't even need to know what bank you are. All I need to know is your phone number. Now, this has already been rolled out since last year. What we're working on this year is to enable the same system to be available to companies. Once you have a situation where people can transfer money against themselves, can pay merchants, hawkers, service providers directly, the objective here is to create a low transaction, frictionless system, which ultimately, again, is aimed at increasing opportunities for our businesses, saving money for people, making our system more competitive overall. So watch this space on e-payments. Now, the other point for e-payments is that a key element of this is also to be able to transact across borders. Now, I don't believe that you will have a single e-payment system dominant worldwide. I don't believe in that. I think all governments will be watching this space with great concern. I focus, therefore, on the question of interoperability. So yes, I will want to be able to pay someone in Thailand or in Indonesia or India or China and vice versa. How do we make the systems interoperate? And in fact, this is something which we need to work on as ASEAN, as Southeast Asia, because all of us want to get onto the digital bandwagon, but we want to make sure we get on collectively and it maximizes opportunities for our people and our businesses. So a lot's going on e-payment. In the next couple of months, you will also see what we call SingPass Mobile. It's really got to do with this question of digital identity. And this next iteration adds biometric authentication. So it's not just a password and a 2-factor authentication, but elements of biometric authentication, as well as relying on PKI, public key infrastructure, to enhance the security and encryption. And of course, if we get this right, it opens up many possibilities in future, even for digital contracts. Basically, if you think about really achieving a revolution in both payments and identity, you arrive at a situation where you can have transactions cashless, paperless, and presenceless. Now again, that may be of interest to a geek, but if you translate that to real life, again, it is about reducing barriers to entry, reducing transaction costs, saving money for customers, improving margins for merchants, service providers. So that's another area which we are working quite hard on. At the same time, when you're talking about money and identity, security and privacy are key. So we've also got to do this in a careful, deliberate way. I'm sure that there will be teething challenges, but we must not make any fatal errors. The third national project which we are rolling out, in fact trials have begun, is a national sensor platform. In a city, and the CLC must be particularly interested in, how do we maximize all the signals, congestion, air quality, water quality, videos, sound. How do we maximize the utility from all this huge amount of data to make life safer, more convenient, a higher quality of life? We are exploring making every lamppost smart. We call it a smart lamppost, but actually it goes far beyond that. That every lamppost is part of plug-and-play infrastructure. You can put in your sensors, you can put in your other robotic and other smart devices, which will provide services to people. At the same time, there are technical and security challenges. We've got to make sure there's sufficient bandwidth. We've got to make sure that there's sufficient, the balance between edge, this is getting technical, edge processing and central processing is right so that we don't unnecessarily consume bandwidth, that the data is anonymized so that we don't breach people's privacy. At the same time, we improve security. Security at home, security in your neighborhood, and we make it easier for the police or security agencies if an incident occurs to have eyes and ears and be able to respond quickly and effectively. So that's the third one. The other two projects involve healthcare. How do we get to the point where electronic medical records, not for the sake of making it electronic, but really to send this reminder that our healthcare data belongs to us, belongs to the patient. It doesn't belong to the doctor or to the hospital. And yet, because this data is so personal, so sensitive, we've got to make sure that the security, the privacy is protected. But again, and I can speak here as a doctor, if we get the healthcare data right, it has profound implications for making customized medicine work, reducing adverse outcomes, drug interactions which don't work in my particular genotype, and improving overall the quality of healthcare provided and improving public health. So there's a lot going on. So I would characterize it stuff. We've done stuff already in the past couple of years. I mean, it's not something we just started yesterday. There's a lot of ongoing work. Watch this space over the next few months, the next couple of years.
Wow, so that is really a lot of things we can look forward to.
Yes.
So my next question is kind of a multi-part question that alludes to some of the points that you've already touched on. You talk about the infrastructure that's being laid, the kind of sensor platforms we have, the kind of buzzy places we need to create to encourage startups and accelerate their growth. How do you think we need to plan our city to anticipate these kinds of changes? And you also talk a lot about the kind of new initiatives like e-payments and digital identity. But we know that not everyone in Singapore is fluent with apps or are able to adopt these changes quickly.
Yes.
So what measures do you think or are going to be put in place to help us to continue to be an inclusive society, even as we become smarter. And this idea of AI at the very cutting edge has a lot of implications, as you mentioned early on privacy and on morality. So some people might find some of these developments creepy and scary,
Yes.
and you mentioned, especially in terms of job prospects and how we live our everyday life and our personal privacy. So could you elaborate on some of these ideas that
you've actually asked several questions,
Yes.
and pretty important questions at that. I think let's deal first with inclusion. I mentioned earlier just now that for this effort, I don't believe in just an 80-20 principle. It has to be 100%. There has to be universal access. Then the next question is, okay, well, if you say you want 100% access, first, what are you going to do with the digital divide? Meaning, is access to digital technology going to be limited to people with money? The answer clearly is no. Fortunately, it has become easier because the cost of hardware has fallen so dramatically over the last, literally over the last 5-10 years. Today, frankly, the true cost of an entirely capable smartphone is somewhere in the order of $30 to $50. Never mind all the high-end models which people market, but if you want a phone, connectivity with processing power, the ability to provide a graphical user interface, frankly, it is in that order. Now, this is where governments then need to work with the people to make sure that everyone has access to such devices. Now, having said that, it's actually not about the device. So again, in fact, the key thing I want to emphasize is design. And the best example of that is if you look at the revolution for tablets, and in particular, let's say the iPad when it first came out. The key is not that it was the most technically advanced tablet, but design. You got the user interface so that technology recedes, and even toddlers or very senior people who have never touched a computer, never touched a keyboard, actually can point and click and zoom in. So it is about design, and then there still needs to be some hand-holding. There still needs to be an effort to reach out to people, to give them confidence. Look, this is how you use it. This is how you access the services. So I believe that a combination of making sure technology is available, dramatically improving design so that it's intuitive to humans, and hand-holding. There has to be the human touch. So every community center, every school, every library needs to have, in a sense, a digital concierge. Someone will tell, well, how can I help you? What is it you need? This is how you do it. Let me hold your hand and literally and help you get over it. Now, there's one other dimension which is especially applicable to us and in fact makes us relevant to the rest of the world, which is multilingual. So for instance, we have to make sure that all essential services work through all the official languages. And frankly, even for this, fortunately the technology has caught up. Translations are not perfect, but they're getting better and they're becoming functional. But in any case, as a government, we must be prepared to invest in multilingual capability so there will be no linguistic divide. And in fact, being able to roll out services in a multilingual way also makes us relevant to Southeast Asia and beyond. So this is another area I'm pushing my staff very hard on, that I want to see not just a pretty intuitive interface, I want a multilingual interface. It sends the signal that we are not going to allow anyone or any group to be left behind. So I think that's very important.
And the idea of, the livable city of the future that is also smart. Do you have any thoughts about how, should planning change? Should the way we have been approaching building the city, now we have cities with lots of roads, and
Yes.
because with new disruptive technologies like autonomous vehicles,
Yes.
do you see a lot of changes in the city that would occur?
Yes, I do. Well, first of all,
Yeah.
I would say that I'm very glad that 52 years ago, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and the pioneer generation said we do not want to be a concrete jungle, even though we are going to be a metropolis in Southeast Asia. And the way we decided on being a garden city and ultimately to be a city in a garden, that paradigm, of incorporating green and conserving nature and protecting our environment, frankly, it was ahead of its time. But we are so thankful that we had that paradigm right. Now we fast forward to today. I think it still has to be green, it still has to be sustainable, it still has to be a human level of development. So it doesn't matter how high rise or how futuristic a city is, it has to work for human beings. Right? Things need to be within walkable range, convenient range. Schools, libraries, healthcare facilities, social amenities, your workplace has to be nearby, because no one wants to spend hours in a commute that makes you angry and frustrated. So the way we design our cities, the way we plan our public infrastructure, even autonomous vehicles, to me the real value of autonomous vehicles is to make public transport, it's not about private, it's really about making public transport more convenient, cost effective, and that the time that you spend traveling is also time that you spend either reading, refreshing, browsing, connecting, active social time, and not time caught in a jam getting frustrated. Nothing damages your mood more than being this feeling that you're trapped and you're wasting your time. So again, to focus on human beings. Similarly, again, as a doctor, I can tell you, human beings have a need for a minimum level of exercise and movement. So we don't want a city where we're all just transported in pods and deposited in our destinations. There has to be human walking, running, jogging, cycling. It doesn't matter what your preference is, but the human body still needs the challenge of physical activity. And then you need sufficient social interaction. In the end, it's still about human, you still need to relate to human beings.
Yeah, I think
it's not just a piece of
the idea of
technology.
The people being at the center
Yes.
of everything is of course still a very important one, and I think from all you say, I'm very glad to hear that we're not going to be living in a ubiquitously smart city, but a city where people are still at the center of planning and design. And I think you alluded a little bit about the future of work earlier on in what you told us, and some of these smart options would help us to make better choices and to be able to save time and save money in the kind of choices we make in everyday life. So how do you envisage the future of work and the future of life in general? Will we have a lot of time? Will people be doing 3 jobs simultaneously because they can? Or would they have a lot more choices to how they spend every day? How would you imagine this to be?
This is another profound question that goes beyond the city.
Yes.
I have no doubt that work will be completely disrupted by technology. It has happened before. Even if you take a place like America, in 1870, about 80% of Americans were involved. Their jobs depended on agriculture, working on farms or transporting farm product. America, 1870. Today, less than 2% of Americans are involved in agricultural work. But from 1870 to 2018, you've had a couple of centuries for that transition to occur. From an agricultural age to an industrial age. We are now moving to a digital age. The difference is in the pace of that change. Where that transition of agriculture industrial, you had a couple of generations to get used to it. Today, I don't think you have the luxury of time. That's why I do believe in our lifetimes, we will have 2 or 3 different jobs because the technology has changed. Now, again, if you look at the nature of jobs, again, if you think about the past, the moment the steam engine or windmills got invented, human labor, even animal labor, became commoditized because a machine could work tirelessly at something which in the past only human and animal muscle could do. What is happening now in this age of artificial intelligence, big data, pervasive sensors, is that many other routine tasks that used to depend on human beings and used to provide good middle-class white-collar jobs are at risk. And there are various alarming studies that show it could be something like up to 47% of all jobs are going to be disrupted in the next couple of decades. Right? So the question is, we actually need to take a step back and say, well, if that's going to happen, if data entry is going to be replaced by sensors, if even bookkeeping, auditing is going to be done by smart systems, what is left for human beings and human ingenuity? My own sense of it is that jobs that depend on high touch and high art creativity will require human beings. But if what you are focused on is something repetitive, something which can be automated, or even something which is amenable to specialized artificial intelligence, then you're at risk. So that's why my focus on always keeping an eye on what's going to happen next, what skills do I need. But this point about high touch and high art is relevant, you see. Because for instance, even in this digital age, and nowadays everyone produces movies and web pages, it's not so much the technical details of whether you can write HTML or you understand the difference between raw and TIFF images. But you need the artist with the eye for composition. You need the designer who can create a website that is compelling, is emotionally resonant, that gets the message across. Okay? So, for instance, the videographer, I do not believe cannot be replaced by a machine. The machine he uses will change. The cameras, the post-production tools will change. But that eye for composition, that eye for beauty, for aesthetics, that will remain in demand. Right? So, in a paradoxical way, you need both high-tech and high-art people. And most of us don't have, that perfect set of skills, but we should all roughly know what our strengths and weaknesses are and adapt to the future.
Yeah, that's good to know. My next question is about...
So that means writers, videographers, artists will still have a job. Don't worry about that.
Right, yes, good to know. And, especially in some of these presentations I've heard of AI, that some of these AI devices have been able to make very complicated diagnosis, even that some of the top oncologists have not been
No,
able
I
to
can give you examples from my medical
yeah,
background.
yeah,
There's no question that expert systems can improve the accuracy of diagnosis, can improve even the safety of medical procedures. There's no question as a surgeon that robotics has enabled us to operate at a level of precision. Even let's say for eye surgery, you know, when we're correcting, say, short-sightedness, the level of precision which the machines operate at, you know, 0.25 of a micron, 1/4 of 1,000th of a millimeter. A human surgeon cannot operate or see at that level of precision, right? So no question that medicine and surgery will be transformed by AI and robotics. But fortunately, I still think doctors will be necessary because medicine is still a high-touch field.
Yes.
You need to see someone, explain to someone, have a empathetic relationship. Even offering the options, you need to understand the patient, and the patient needs to have trust. So the job will be transformed, but the human relations will still be needed.
It cannot be replaced.
It can't be replaced. You see, so that's why my emphasis on high touch and high art.
Good for the elaboration. My next question is actually about ASEAN.
Yes.
Singapore chairs the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, this year, and has announced the formation of an ASEAN Smart Cities Network.
Yes.
How do you see such collaborations contributing to the development of ASEAN cities and their people's aspirations?
Well, as I said earlier, at a global level, more than half the population now lives in cities. That same phenomenon is occurring within ASEAN. Hence the focus on cities and establishing a network of cities where a couple of things can take place. First, we can exchange ideas. We can look at how each of us has deployed technology. We can learn from both the successes and, equally important, the failures. Don't repeat mistakes which have been made elsewhere. Furthermore, it helps us with our integration agenda, which means, say for instance, for trade facilitation, to have a single window, to have self-certification, to make sure our payment systems, our invoicing systems, our trade systems interoperate. So there's a very large field of collaboration which we can work on collectively to make ASEAN even more integrated and to make use of digital technologies to do so. And again, if you consider the size and diversity of ASEAN, if you think about my earlier example about making transactions, cashless, paperless, and presenceless, it allows us to connect, the consumer in Singapore seamlessly with the person who's producing the vegetables that I'm eating, the rice, or the services. Similarly, the smallest handicraft maker in any corner of ASEAN to be able to gain access to a larger market of 630 million people seamlessly and with very low transaction costs. That reducing the distance and reducing the friction, I think, will expand opportunities for all of us in ASEAN. So that's why this is an area worth us focusing on. And that's why we have launched the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. It actually goes far beyond just technology and cities. It is about expanding opportunities by integrating every citizen of ASEAN and making sure that these new cutting-edge digital technologies are used to achieve that objective.